Welcome to the first episode of the Alaska Airmen Association podcast. My name's Abby Austin. I'm the director of the association. With me is...
I'm Adam White, Government Legislative Affairs for the Alaska Airmen.
Wonderful. So why did we start a podcast? Everyone else has one. We wanted one too. They're a great platform to share what we're working on, dive deep into issues that you're working on.
And that's been one of the big issues for me. I do a monthly advocacy update on social media, and there's a lot of issues that I talk about and deal with. I just don't have the time to do them justice.
Yeah.
And so this is an opportunity for us to dive deep.
Great. So we hope to bring you a lot of episodes from Adam and some of his guests, and then hopefully some other episodes about scholarships, community events, hopefully just stories of Alaska aviation history. So what are we talking about today, Adam?
So 100 low lead. We've all heard that there's announcements from the government about 100 low lead and about it's going away. What does that mean? What does that look like? And we've talked a little bit about this on my monthly updates, but there's a lot more to this issue than I can cover in those. And so what I wanted to do is to be able to come on here and you and I have a little bit of a conversation initially about what has happened, what we think the road ahead is going to look like, maybe actually deal with some things that are not going to happen that a lot of people are thinking might.
Yeah.
Along with this, got some conversations that we're going to include with this from Crowley Fuels. Crowley is the primary supplier of 100 low lead for the state of Alaska. And there's a lot of interesting things about bringing 100 low lead to us that I didn't realize. And what that's going to do for us if we make a shift to a different fuel, that's not an easy thing to do, and it's not going to happen overnight.
Yeah.
It's actually going to take a couple of years, believe it or not. And we'll talk about that here a little bit later with Ross St. John from Crowley Fuels. Somebody else I wanted to bring into the conversation is Kurt Hartwig with Eagle Fuel Cells. And everybody's talking about how a replacement fuel will run an engine. Well, the engine's going to run fine. Well, we all know there's more to an airplane than just the engine. We've got fuel system components, we've got fuel selectors. Depending on your type of airplane, you may actually have fuel bladders instead of a wet wing.
Yeah.
Even with the wet wing, what is this fuel replacement? How is that going to interact with our fuel systems? What are we looking at for that? And there's not been a lot of conversation, to be honest with you, about that side of a switch.
Yeah.
And I think that's important for us here in Alaska. That's important for our membership to know and understand that we're thinking about these things. And so because of our relationship with folks, been able to reach out to these people and have them kind of educate us a little bit more about what this transition is going to look like. So that's what I wanted to accomplish with the first podcast.
That sounds great. I look forward to diving in.
Let's get to it.
All right. So what is the issue with 100 low lead, Adam? Why is everybody talking about it?
So some of you may be old enough to remember when automotive fuel had lead in it.
I'm definitely not that old.
I am. I am old enough to know when there was lead in our car gas. And when that went away, the conversation came around to what about aviation fuel? Because we still have lead, it's tetraethyl lead technically, in our fuel. And it's there to help boost the octane so that our engines can run better at higher compression ratios. And we don't need to get too deep into what all that really means and why, other than to say our aircraft engines are higher enough performance that we have to have this type of fuel.
Right. And the vast majority of small aircraft cannot run standard auto gas.
Yeah. So there's a lot of statistics that have been thrown around for this, and that's, statistics can prove just about anybody's position, depending on how you use them. And there's been a lot of conversation going back and forth. Well, there's some easy replacement fuels for 100 low lead. Well, let's define what easy means. When people say that, what they mean is that yes, a vast majority of the general aviation fleet doesn't have to have 100 octane fuel.
The engines will
literally
run.
Will
Yes.
literally run on something
Yeah.
less than 100 octane fuel.
Yeah.
The problem is that's about 70% of the fleet doesn't need 100 octane. But that last 30% of the fleet burns 90% of the fuel.
Okay.
And that 30% of the fleet has to have 100 octane fuel.
Okay.
So when you hear the environmental side of this, well, I don't understand what the problem is, because 70% of these airplanes could fly tomorrow on a fuel other than 100 low end. Well, they can, but the 30% of the aircraft that have to have it are doing 90% of the flight hours.
Yeah.
And for us here in Alaska, that's the bread and butter of the small 135 operations, of what we fly around with our own families to go hunting, to go fishing, to our recreational use. That's the kind of fuels that we have to have to do what we do. And so, again, numbers can convey any kind of a story depending on how you present them. And so that's what I need people to understand, is that this is not an easy issue.
Well, could you help me? Because I'm surprised by that statistic. So who are those 70%? I would have thought it was the other way around. Who are those 70% that could switch today?
So it's the lower compression, smaller horsepower.
Right.
Actually, a lot of the Cub type aircraft,
Right.
a lot of the smaller Cessna
Right.
type aircraft, the Taylorcrafts.
I guess I
the
just didn't
Aroncas,
realize that was 70% of the
actual fleet.
GA fleet.
Yeah.
Okay. I assumed that there was, so like a Cessna 172 could run car gas?
So again, those lower compression, lower horsepower, yes, some of the 172s, very easy to get an auto fuel STC
Okay.
because you're running a lower octane fuel, right?
Okay.
So two of the airplanes that I fly, just as an example that I'm very familiar with, I fly an M7 MAL. It's got the 0540 engine in it. It's large displacement, but it's a low compression engine. It was certified on 82 octane fuel.
Really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
So I've got an STC to burn auto gas in the MAL. Now my other aircraft that I fly is a Cessna 206. Well, that has been converted. You originally had a Continental 520.
Mm-hmm.
It's been converted to a 550. So it's a higher displacement, 300 horsepower continuous, high compression engine.
Mm-hmm.
It cannot run without 100 octane fuel.
It would literally run, but it would be damaged.
It would run for a very short time.
Okay. Yeah.
And it would self-destruct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So hit me with that statistic again, though. So that 30% that require it.
The 30% of the fleet
Uh-huh.
that requires 100 octane fuel consumes 90% of the fuel sold.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay.
Because usually it's a higher displacement engine.
Yeah.
It consumes more gallons per hour,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah.
instead of 8 gallons an hour or
Yeah.
even less, depending on like a T-car, it's 6 gallons an hour.
Yeah.
You know, a Cub 10 to 12, sometimes more.
Mm-hmm.
Where like a Cessna 206 is 15 to 16 gallons
Right.
an hour.
Right.
Now you're talking about Navajos, or 207. You know those.
And likely maybe used for business as opposed to just
And
pleasure.
flying more
Yeah.
than what you do just to go out to
Yeah.
your cabin on the
Yeah.
weekends.
Yeah.
It's flying 8 hours a day,
Yeah.
literally.
Yeah.
Because
That
they're
makes
having to
sense.
make money with it.
So the statistic of 70% of aircraft could make the switch is misleading.
It's misleading.
Yeah.
It's an accurate statement,
Yeah.
but it's misleading.
Yeah.
And that's why it's important that we have this conversation, that we get the facts out there from the perspective of us, where it's directly impacting our members.
Yeah.
This is a big problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't think anybody is making the argument that lead is safe.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
we've
Right.
known
We've
for
known
a
that
long time.
Right.
Nobody's arguing that lead is safe. Now, there have been some studies done. There's actually a study here in Anchorage at Merrill Field, an air quality study that the EPA commissioned. It's available on the Municipality of Anchorage's website. If you want to go look at that report, it's easy to find. Just do lead air quality Merrill Field. Just put that in your search engine. You'll find it. It's on the Muni's website. It wasn't as bad as we thought it was.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not good.
Right.
I
right.
I mean, how much of a poison are you wanting to?
Right.
You know, it's still
Right.
poisonous. It's still
Right.
hazardous to
How
you.
much are you comfortable with?
Right.
Right.
And there's just some arguments that if it was really hazardous, we'd see huge numbers of cancer or other developmental problems or whatever because of this.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to go back and quantify. I know California has tried really hard to directly associate schools that are in close proximity to airports and the developmental challenges that some of those students have.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of those studies have actually gone back and folks have said, well, yes, but there's more to this study than just the correlation that they're close to an airport.
Right.
Correlation is not causation.
Right.
There's other factors that weren't taken into consideration that were probably more legitimate, rationale for some of these problems.
Sure.
But again, at the end of the day, none of us are saying that lead is good for your health.
Yeah.
Lead is good for our engines.
Right.
Which is in turn good for my health.
Right.
But,
mental health maybe.
Right.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, the big prop up there is just to keep the pilot from sweating.
Right.
The engine shuts off, I start sweating really bad.
Right.
But the reason why the lead is in the fuel is to increase the octane rating.
Right.
That's why it's there. There's some other things that it does internally to the engine, lubricates the valves a little bit, some other stuff. But we've been able to overcome those issues with materials that we are now using. That's not as big of a deal.
Yeah.
But getting the octane up there is what we're trying to do.
Yeah. So why is this pressing now? What has the EPA come out and said?
So the EPA about a year ago, in 2022, came out and says, hey, get ready. We're going to issue a final determination, a final endangerment finding. And that was basically to tell the whole world, get ready for the bad news because it's coming.
Yeah, it sounds ominous.
Right.
Yeah.
So we knew this was coming. And so in October of 2023, the EPA did release their endangerment finding. And what that document basically says is that lead is hazardous to your health. Lead is not good for the environment. The largest single contributor to airborne lead in the United States is 100 low lead fuel. Again, none of this was a surprise.
Right.
We all knew this. So the EPA has just officially made it known and gone on record and said, this is a problem. This is now officially determined, and we want to see leaded aviation fuel go away.
So what does that mean for us? Why do we care if there's no new information in that?
So what this has done is this has started a very official, long drawn out process. So this basically mandates to the FAA, you need to start the process to officially replace this fuel.
Right. So if there was anyone holding out hope
that we'll be able to do this forever, that's gone.
That's gone.
That's gone.
Right. Okay. So the clock started ticking today.
Yeah.
But yet we don't know how much time is on this clock officially, right?
So there's no official deadline. There is no by this date you must.
Yeah.
That's never been said by the EPA.
Okay.
They actually don't have that authority.
Really?
No.
Okay.
So the FAA now has to start this process, and the FAA has a goal, and that's all this is a goal, working with EAGLE, which is an acronym because you can't do anything in aviation without an acronym, but it's Eliminate Aviation Gas Lead Emissions. That's what EAGLE stands for.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of a joint committee and a group between the FAA and industry. The Alaska Airmen Association is a part of that group. A lot of the other alphabet soup organizations are part of that too.
Yeah.
I'll admit we're not a huge player.
Sure.
Because we just don't have the clout. A lot of the other organizations.
We're a small organization.
But we are at the table. We've been at the table from the beginning. The EAGLE initiative has a goal that by 2030, we will have found a replacement. It will be out in the market, and we will no longer have the need for 100 octane low lead fuel.
Are there repercussions if they don't meet that goal? Are they accountable to the EPA? It's hard to say.
So actually there's a statement that the EPA had in their press release that talks about this, and I want to pull it up and read it because I want to make sure I get it right, word for word. And the EPA stated, this final endangerment finding does not ban or impose restrictions on the use, sale, distribution, dispensing, and general availability of leaded fuel.
Interesting.
nor does it establish any new control measures regarding aircraft lead emissions.
It just opens you up to lawsuits.
So what it does, and what it has
does.
done, is it's given places like California, just to be honest, it's given places like California what they feel the ammunition
Right.
to say, look, this is a known problem. It's been admitted by the federal government, by the EPA,
Right.
that this is a problem. You need to stop doing this.
Right. Or you're going to get sued.
Or you're going to get sued.
Yeah.
You're not going to have the availability. Now,
Right.
here's the other part of this. Since the EPA has made that statement, which is all fact, they
Right.
they're not going to say something that's untrue.
Yeah.
What does the FAA do about this?
Yeah.
So the FAA's job is to ensure that aviation happens in a safe manner. Now, a lot of people disagree with the way they do that, but this is Alaska. And
Is that their official mandate?
that it's not specifically mentioned that way. They
Okay.
used to have a mission statement
Okay.
that talked about promoting aviation and all that kind of stuff.
Okay.
They've changed the mission statement through the years, and it's a
Okay.
little. I think they could come up with a better mission statement
Yeah.
to do some of these things, but that's another podcast.
Sure.
So basically, what the FAA is responsible for doing is to ensure that we have a safe way of operating and,
Right.
and conducting aviation
But
activities.
now the EPA has said the fuel is not safe.
And the FAA now has to address what the EPA has come out and said: the fuel that you use in piston-powered aircraft is a hazard to the environment and a hazard to people.
Yeah.
You need to find an alternative.
Yeah.
So the FAA has been tasked to do this. That statement from the EPA basically says there's no new measures put in place, there's no new restrictions, there's no bans, there's none of that a part of this endangerment finding. So the FAA now, that actually helps them do this, because now they've got this endangerment finding kind of pushing them along.
Sure.
So now, instead of let's just talk about this because we all don't like lead in the environment,
Mm-hmm.
but yeah, it's a hard thing to replace. So we're just going to have to live with it.
Yeah.
Not anymore.
Got it.
So here's what the FAA can and can't do, though. So places like California, where they've already talked about, well, we'll just ban the sale of 100 low lead fuel. The FAA says, no, you can't do that, because you're basically shutting down a segment of the industry.
So they do have the authority to protect the industry in that way, to some extent.
They have the responsibility to protect it.
Okay.
And I say that word instead of authority because they're limited into what they can do.
Mm-hmm.
The FAA can't come to an airport and say, you can't do that, you have to do this or that. They do in a lot of areas. But in this particular case, the stick that they have is that the federal government has given most airports funding.
Sure.
So they've given them grants for improving their airport in a lot of different areas. And now with that grant becomes grant assurances. If you accept this money from the federal government, you have to agree to a long list of stipulations over a long period of time. It's usually a 20-year time period from the date that you accepted those funds. And so now the FAA can come back to the airport and say, you cannot ban the sale of 100 octane, 100 low lead fuel without endangering your grant assurances. And if you are in violation of grant assurances, the potential is that you would have to refund the government the grants that they've given you for your airport.
Which I'm sure no one wants to do.
Most communities can't afford to do that.
Right.
That's the reason why they accepted the grant to begin
Right.
with. They couldn't afford to do this on their own.
Right.
So the FAA has that club, for lack of a better term, to threaten, to hold the feet of the airport to the task of making sure that fuel is still available.
Yeah.
And again, the FAA is very clear on this. They know and understand that lead is bad for the environment, but until we have a replacement, we have to keep this segment of aviation alive.
Great.
So we do have the FAA in our corner in that regard. The other thing the FAA has said and done, and I'm going to put this in air quotes because they say this all the time, but when you press them on what does it mean when you say this, they have an answer, but it doesn't make me feel good.
Okay.
Okay, it doesn't give me warm fuzzies.
Right.
So they say that the replacement fuel must be a direct drop-in replacement fuel. And when you press them on that, what that means is that I should not have to do anything to modify my aircraft.
Yeah.
I shouldn't have to do anything with the systems or anything else. And it should just be able to be put into my fuel tank at whatever blended ratio of fuel I may have had in there. Let's say I had a half a tank of fuel of 100 low lead, and I put the new fuel in there. Well, now I got a 50-50 blend. Is that going to actually work on my engine, or am I going to have to flush my tanks out and rebuild a fuel system to be able to accept this stuff? The FAA's goal is to have a fuel that will work in conjunction with what we have today and be a seamless replacement.
Now, see, what does that word goal mean?
That's what we're shooting for.
Because the FAA has no problem telling me I need to make expensive modifications to my aircraft in the name of safety.
Right.
So,
and that's what the whole airworthiness directive process is.
Right.
It usually costs us money.
So why in this case do they have this goal, and do you think that it's realistic that they can meet that?
So I'm not going to be able to answer specifically for the FAA.
Sure.
But in the conversations I've had with folks within the FAA, they understand that this is a big deal. This is not just a particular segment of the general aviation community, like a type specific aircraft.
Yeah.
This is a fleet-wide problem. And in order for us to fix a fleet-wide problem, we need to have a solution that just works.
Yeah.
And this is what that means.
So they're more comfortable with like an AD because it's a small scale.
Right. It's a known safety issue. We're fixing a problem that was a safety issue.
Right.
We're not fixing a safety issue. We're fixing a health issue.
Oh, interesting.
A health and environmental issue.
Interesting.
So
there's a distinction there. Maybe. Who knows?
Yeah. I mean, we're not going through the AD process. This is a totally different process.
Right.
So with that process, so there's two different ways that the FAA has put out there to get fuel certified. So there's the STC process, the Supplemental Type Certificate process, and we already have a fuel that's approved for that today, the GAMI solution.
Right.
And now you have to purchase an STC for your specific airframe and engine combination in order to legally burn their fuel.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's another fuel, Swift is the name of the company, that's going through that STC process. There's another process that goes through the FAA certification route where it's not a supplemental type certificate, but if they go through this PAFI is the acronym for that, and I can't remember what that is now. But when you go through the PAFI certification route, that fuel is then available for any and every internal combustion, piston driven aircraft.
It's like a direct replacement.
It is, right. Yeah.
Right.
So it's approved by, and anybody can burn it, anybody can use it.
Right.
Now there's different routes, there's different policies and procedures to go those different routes. There's advantages for one over the other. We've got,
how do I get access to these fuels?
Well, and so that's what we're going to talk about with Crowley Fuel.
Yeah.
And that's an interesting conversation, and folks need to stick around for that because Alaska has some pretty unique challenges when it comes to supply chain.
Yeah.
But if it's an STC process, well, now there's an additional cost to you and I as consumers.
Right.
So anyway, at the end of all this, I'm hoping that there'll be one fuel that kind of rises to the top.
Mm-hmm.
That would be the replacement for 100 low lead.
Mm-hmm.
And we'll talk more about why I think we need to have just one because of the unique issues we have here in Alaska. But there may be more than one that's certified and available.
Mm-hmm.
But in practice, I think at the end of all this, as much as I love capitalism and free market, I think that there's going to be one fuel that rises to the top. What I don't want to see happen though, Abby, I don't want to see that fuel be from a manufacturer that has the best marketing department.
Sure.
This is not a marketing campaign.
This is not a Coke versus Pepsi situation.
No, right.
Yeah.
And who's got the bigger marketing budget?
Yeah.
I need the better fuel on its own merit, not based off of what some slick marketing ad tells me.
Well, that's tricky. I mean, how will that one choice rise to the top then if it's not through?
It's going to be
marketing.
Well, marketing is going to play into it.
Yeah.
But it's going to take time for the industry to be able to use this fuel AOPA just announced that they are doing a long-term test now with the Baron, a twin-engine Beechcraft, with the GAMI fuel. They're going to do a long-term burn test with that.
And they claim to be impartial, and it's
They do, yeah. And GAMI's just the one that's out there that's got an STC right now. And I'm sure that our friends at AOPA, if there's another fuel available when they're done with this, that they would do that one too. I would hope that they would, in order to be fair and honest with this assessment. And my understanding of what they're doing with that test is that one engine will only burn 100 low lead. The other engine will only burn the new fuel. And then they'll be able to tell the difference, a side-by-side direct comparison. So it's going to be those kinds of real-world usage tests that we need to see happen here in Alaska. A lot of the certification and the testing for these fuels is accelerated. So when we ask the question about cold weather suitability, well, we put it in a cold chamber for 2 days. Well, sorry. Fairbanks is more than a cold weather chamber for 2 days. You can't just expect that to be good enough. You go up on the North Slope, it's been sitting in a barrel for 2 years, and it's been 60 below, and it's been 70, 80 degrees above, So those things can't be done in a laboratory to satisfy my...
And I'm assuming if I'm a manufacturer or a producer of this product, I'm motivated to get it to market quickly and first to be that one that rises to the top. So, which is exactly the opposite of what we need from this process.
Need to have happen, And I've gone on record. As a matter of fact, I said it in a meeting this morning. With FAA folks in it. Alaska has got this awesome track record of being the one place where you want to come and do your research and development. And prove your technology. And we here in Alaska,
we can break it.
Because we here in Alaska want to be doing the latest and the greatest and the best, right? We are who the world looks to for off-airport operations. We've got things happening just down the road over here. People are building incredible modifications for airplanes that the whole world watches and waits for. I don't know that this is what we need to be doing for fuels. We need to be testing them. We need to be helping these companies figure out if they're going to work. But we can't be early adopters. We have to make sure that it's not the first one to market. Whether it may or may not be at the end, that may be the one we decide is best. But we can't just simply rely, well, they were the first one to market. Or another company that's coming out with a potential candidate, but through the PAFI process, is part of the large, it's Phillips 66. It's a bigger corporation. They've got deeper pockets. They probably are going to have the better marketing department. They've got a better depth of resources to do that. Now, does that mean that they have the worst product and they just have a slicker sales? Maybe. We don't know. We don't know that.
And I'm sure Ross from Crowley's going to explain he can't bring up 10 flavors and let us try them all out.
Small batches, maybe to individual small air taxis. Can be that kind of test market. Maybe sitting over at Merrill Field, there's a separate tank at their card lock that you can buy some of this new fuel and test it, but it's not going to be in huge batches. And that's what Ross is going to get into for us.
Well, I look forward to hearing that.
So this is exciting to be able to do these deeper dives, and we've talked a long time about a lot of really detailed things. But I think our membership wants to hear these things. I'm hearing these things coming back from you folks that when you reach out to me that you want to know these things. And I think this is going to be an excellent platform for us to do it. All right, hello everybody. Again, talking about 100 low lead and how that's going to impact the state when it goes away, and what does that mean for us in the real world. So with me, I've got Ross St. John with Crowley. You may or may not know, but without Crowley doing what they do, we wouldn't have any aviation fuel in the state, regardless of what type it may be. And so there's a big part of this that a lot of people are not really thinking through, and that's the logistical side and supply chain. And what does this mean for us when we move forward with a change away from leaded aviation fuel? So Ross, you and I have talked a lot about this issue. There's a lot of things that I think once people understand and kind of realize, we'll come to grips that this is not an easy thing for us to do. And so I kind of wanted to hear from your side of the story of what does Crowley think a transition would look like, knowing that it's not going to happen tomorrow, knowing that we're at least a year away if everything were to fall in place today, which we're nowhere near that happening.
Absolutely.
And so what are we looking like? What's going to happen? What's going on in your world? And what are you guys at Crowley doing to make sure we're going to be able to continue to fly?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to come and speak about this, because this is a very large line of business for us.
Sure.
And it's a highly regulated, safety conscious line of work that we take pride in. And there's a lot that goes into it right now with 100 low lead. And with the EPA finding, it hasn't, there's no proclamation that low lead's going to go away. We're going to keep supplying whatever the product is to keep planes operating in Alaska. Obviously, that's a huge factor of transportation and business in Alaska.
Right.
So whatever it takes, we're going to be there and we're going to do it. And we want to be part of the conversation moving into the distribution of whatever this replacement product is. There's a few players out there that have some viable options, but again, nothing available in large scale commercial aspect yet.
Sure.
So obviously the biggest thing is, how do we get whatever this new product is to market? And it's a simple in nature, but there's, you pick it up and you drop it in a tank, but there's a lot of things that we just don't know yet for what the requirement is going to be with whatever this replacement product is. Real quickly, I'm going to just explain what we do now, and
right.
then how does that affect when we have to make this switch.
And I think that's an important thing for everybody to understand. What does it take? Where did this fuel go that I just purchased when I put it in the wing of my airplane?
Correct.
How did it get here? What all was involved for it to get to where, even if it's remote Bush, Alaska, it probably flowed through some component of Crowley's infrastructure.
Yes. And actually, as we've discussed before, the lion's share of avgas in Alaska has at some point touched a Crowley asset.
Sure.
So we actually have two main parts that are Crowley specific, and then there's a third separate, but it also kind of ties in with the road system. So first, let's talk about the road system. Anything that comes into Anchorage, Kenai, Fairbanks, it's going to originate out of the Anchorage tank farm. So okay. Crowley leases tanks for Marathon down at the Port of Anchorage. We've got about 4 million gallons of capacity spread across 4 tanks. That fuel comes up via a barge from the lower 48 from Richmond in California. On that transportation, it might stop some areas in Southeast Alaska where we'll sell to another vendor, and then it'll come up to Anchorage. From there, we have a wholesale, the rack as we call it, where other carriers can come and pick up the product. They can take it to their own customers. They have maybe a card lock like we have over here at Lake Hood, where you can pay at the pump. We also sell bulk into other barges that might take it to Kodiak, Dutch Harbor, Seward, different areas.
Sure.
That's the main supply for the road system.
So let me just ask you, about 4 million plus or minus gallons.
Correct.
In the Anchorage facility.
Correct.
How long does that last? Because to me, that 4 million gallons sounds like an awful lot.
It does.
But it's probably not in the real world.
Depending on the season, it's about a 4 to 6 month supply.
Okay.
So again, we'll have 2 to 3 supplies per year of avgas, and we buy in 40 to 50,000 barrels, so 2 million to $2.5 million $2.5 million gallon allotments.
So the scale for this is pretty big.
Exactly.
And is there any kind of seasonal shift that you guys anticipate?
Obviously, in the summer when we got a high tourist season like we did this year, the 135s are operating pretty heavily. We'll see a larger draw then. And then obviously in the winter, when the privateers, the float planes go away, there's a lot less flying. So there's lulls.
But you guys have been doing this long enough. You understand the seasonal ebb and flow.
Correct.
You're looking not months, but a year ahead.
Correct. We look at a year's buy, and then we try to adjust our sailing schedule around that.
Sure.
The other component of it is the Western Alaska operations, the Western Alaska terminals. Now out there, that's a slightly different aviation environment. You know, that's like our highway system around here. That's our roads.
Sure.
That is the road system out
That's
there.
right.
Groceries, medical travel, all these things that occur out there. Well, we have a very tight window in which to operate out there. Obviously, when the freeze up happens, we're not delivering. So we'll spend pretty much the entire winter planning our deliveries over the course of 4 months, what they're going to occur.
And
So-
you're waiting on water conditions, seasonal with the ice coming and going.
Exactly.
So yeah, you can't just pick a date on the calendar and be there. There's a lot of things that play into this.
Exactly. And we've got a lot of places to cover, a tight window to do it. And when it's done, it's done.
Sure.
So we got to make sure that the product gets to the tank. And once it's there, that's what you get for the winter. The only other option really is flying it in, and then fuel gets real expensive,
Sure.
real fast.
I mean, it's expensive to do this as it is with the infrastructure that we have in the state. But if it wasn't for the ability to ship it in with barges and the marine routes, it would all have to be flown in. And we all know the cost of flying an airplane. So that adds to it.
And I think we're going to pop up this graphic here to try to explain a little more carefully here, or a little more specifically. On this map of Alaska, you've got several things going on here. All the little red dots that you see, those are Crowley tanks.
Okay.
We own the tanks. We store your unlead, your heating oil, your jet, avgas, your diesel. Everything gets stored out in there at our terminals. The black dots that you see along the coast are tanks that we deliver to that we don't own.
Okay.
So again, all the same products. Some of those may be like Alaska Village Electric Co-op, just tank farms that are owned by other companies that we'll make deliveries into. The red dashed lines, so that's our bulk ship routes. So the way that we supply is that we have large tankers that will sit offshore, and then we have smaller barges that will then lighter in, deliver smaller allotments to the tank farms. And then from those tank farms, they'll actually draw into smaller barges that go on the river system, and they'll deliver to the smaller villages. And again, this could be any number of products. This could be your heating oil, your jet, your avgas, your unlead, all the things that are required to support the villages out there.
Sure.
And then on the highway system, we have our own tank farms that supply the home heating oil. Some of them have avgas, but obviously we have limited tank capacity. So on the other graphic that we're going to pull up, the storage capacity, the avgas storage capacity.
This is an interesting thing to look at and consider, because I didn't realize these numbers until you showed them to me. And again, it's the economy of scale where you think about how to keep a state like Alaska operating, and where aviation is so important and so vital to our economy and our livelihood. This is what it takes to do that. And this is fascinating to me from a logistical standpoint.
Correct.
So go ahead.
And the big number at the bottom there, that's the Anchorage tank farm that we talked about that we lease from Marathon. That's got about a little over 4 million gallons of capacity. So remember I said we buy in 2 to 2.5 million gallon buys. So that means that I got to run that down to about 50% capacity.
Sure.
But the part that I didn't mention earlier was when we deliver all this fuel into the tank, we then have to do what's called proving the tank. You get a tank analysis because there's old fuel in there mixed with new fuel. It has to be sent to a lab and given its certification, that birth certificate.
Basically meaning that the fuel that's in there is okay to be sold.
It meets the ASTM standard and it's good to deliver.
Sure.
So we run down 2 tanks almost completely empty. We'll fill them up. We'll send them out for proving, and then we can open it up.
Okay.
But with the hope that we still have fuel in the other tank. So there's a little bit of timing in there. So there's a little bit of a scheduling and a coordination effort. But the ones that are really going to be sensitive in this discussion that we're going to have about when this transition happens away from 100 low lead, that's your Antioch, your Kotzebue, your Bethel, your St. Mary's, these
your
places.
regional hubs.
Correct. Where we only get one delivery. Usually there's 2 deliveries, but they're within a narrow window. We try to hit all of these locations at the first sailings so that there's something in the tank, and then we'll do it end of the season top
to
off.
help them make it through the winter.
Correct. So essentially, it's just one large operation spread out over 4 or 5 months.
Okay.
But the fuel that gets there, some of these locations only have one tank. So that's where, when this transition happens, there's going to be a bit of a challenge.
Sure.
I commercially need to make sure that people out there are actually going to buy whatever this product is and that they can use it safely.
Sure.
Also, one of the unknowns that we have right now is, will there be a requirement of a stripping and a cleaning of these tanks in order to use this new product? Are we going to have some sort of remediation? Are we going to have to change our equipment out there? All these things that go into it.
So with that, what we've been told in the industry from the FAA is that the goal is to have a direct drop-in replacement. And I'm using air quotes because that's the phrase that's used all the time. And I'm not a petroleum expert. And to me as a pilot, direct replacement drop-in fuel tells me that I can put this in my tank when it's got a half a tank of 100 low lead in it and I'm good to go. But from your perspective, we only have one tank in a particular location. You and I were talking earlier that it's not so much, you got to make sure it meets a standard, and you've been told the same things we've been told, but in practice, we haven't got to this point yet. We don't really know how this is going to play out. The other big player in this is that the EPA has determined that lead is hazardous.
Correct.
So now you got a hazmat issue that you potentially have to be concerned about. Now, we've gotten some indication that the FAA thinks that, well, it'll just eventually flush itself out over time. But the FAA is not the one that's saying that lead is hazardous. The EPA is saying that. Correct. And so the EPA is who's going to have to determine what you have to do as a fuel supplier with your facilities. Am I understanding that part correct?
That's correct. And there are other things, we deal with the EPA all the time because we have these large tanks. We were just talking about, we had to retrofit our tanks with these floating roofs to lower the amount of emissions released from these tanks.
Sure.
So again, we don't know is that still going to be a requirement with whatever this new product may be?
Right.
Is there going to have to be some remediation that we'll have to do to these tanks? Again, these are all things that we all have a lot of questions, and they're all valid questions.
Right.
We just don't know the answer yet. And the other part that you and I talked about a little bit was the way that things operate down in the lower 48. Some company, an aerofuel operator, they might have a 40,000 gallon tank, and they're a couple hundred miles away from the refinery.
Sure.
When they run low, they just go
They make a phone call and they'll be here tomorrow.
Correct.
Yeah.
Whereas we've delivered all this fuel, what's its shelf life going to be? And what's its cold weather resiliency going to be? Because once we drop it out there in Nome and Kotzebue, it's got a long cold winter and it's going to settle. Is there going to be a stratification issue where the fuels separate if you do this drop-in replacement and you've mixed the fuels?
Sure.
Those are all the questions that we have, and of course we don't have any answer for it yet.
Right.
But obviously that's something we're going to be looking at. And then of course, what standard are we going to be using? Is it going to be ASTM standards for this fuel? Is it going to be some independent third party proving that we're going to have to do? Obviously those are things that we're going to be flushing out, but we're certainly going to we're going to try to stay in front of that.
Sure.
And be ready for when whatever this replacement product is goes to market.
Right.
But we were just saying earlier, let's just say right now product B was available. That doesn't necessarily mean that I can just start selling it tomorrow. It's going to take 1 to 3 years, we estimate, before this flip-flop will happen, because we've got all these different markets that we cover. I don't know that all the customers are going to be on board.
Sure.
So some areas we might have to sell both. Some areas we're only going to sell one. Some areas will sell the new one. But I think it'll be a slow transition at first, but then it's going to be a pretty rapid transition.
So at the end of this, from Crowley's perspective, you obviously want to supply the aviation industry with the fuel that we need, right? You wouldn't be in this business if that wasn't your goal. But from an economic standpoint, you obviously want to supply the fuel that we want to purchase.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so you as a supplier needs to hear from us as a consumer what that product is going to be.
And that's the biggest thing. And I think, we're all kind of standing here waiting for the other person to make the jump when we don't even have the second option economically viable.
Sure.
But that's why I rely on the organizations, you guys here at the Alaska Airmen's Association, AOPA, the Alaska Air Carriers Association.
Sure.
We need to hear from the industry, what's the product going to be? Because if you can commit to me that you're going to buy that product, well, then of course I'm going to supply it.
Yeah. And so we'd been talking earlier that the normal supply chain that you guys use today for 100 low lead, some of the products that are being proposed as being replacements are going to be coming from different parts of the country, different ways, blended in different locations, where you're going to have to go out and find out a different path to be able to get some of these products.
Yes. Luckily, we've got a pretty intelligent transportation community.
I mean, it's
up
not
here.
an insurmountable hurdle, but it's going to be a change in the way you do business.
That's correct. But as I was saying at our other meeting discussion, we actually already have multiple supply lines, and that's just the nature of business. Like, you don't ever want to have just one supply. Right. And so we have the rail system, the marine rail system. We have Asian suppliers. Really, I think that stuff will all kind of fall into place because the infrastructure for us, it already exists.
Sure.
And we already have relationships with the railroad. We already have relationships with suppliers in Asia that may possibly produce this product. We got a lot of irons and a lot of different fires, and we've got a very robust shipping capability.
Sure.
So I don't think that that's going to be an issue realistically.
Okay.
The biggest issue, of course, is the end user. What product are they going to use, and what do we have to do to flip-flop?
Right. Yeah, and I've mentioned this other places, other times. There's a lot of things in aviation where Alaska has been innovative. ADS-B is a perfect example where that was researched and developed and proven here in Alaska, and now has been adopted worldwide. This issue, however, Alaska, we can't really be on the cutting edge of testing some of these things. Now, there are some components of the testing that I wish we were more part of. Cold weather,
yes,
and long-term storage are two of the biggest ones that we have concerns about. And there's presently 4 fuels that are in the running, but that could change tomorrow. One of them could drop out. Somebody else could come in, or somebody, they could change the way this is working. And so at the end, we're not going to have the luxury that a lot of places in the lower 48 might have, where all the potential replacement fuels might be available in a regional area.
Yeah.
We're not going to have that luxury just because of where we live and the logistics of doing this stuff. So I've appreciated Crowley being forward thinking, trying to figure out what this is going to do. I appreciate that you guys have reached out to us and to others that you've mentioned, AOPA and the Alaska Air Carriers as well, to try to get this conversation started early.
Yes.
And that's why I appreciate you being here on this podcast, so we can get our membership thinking through some of these things. And this is why I think it's important that all of you understand we need to be looking at all the aspects of the potential replacement fuels. And we need to figure out what that one best option might be. I don't know that there's going to be a perfect option. I'm just pessimistic enough to think that there's not going to be a perfect option. I hope that there will be, but we don't know that yet.
Yes.
And we're going to have to figure out what this one fuel for Alaska is going to be. And we're running up against some hurdles, to be honest and frank about it, in the DC arena, because they're looking at it from a big regulatory perspective, and they don't want to interfere with private enterprise in the free market. And I appreciate that. I don't want the government interfering with free market. But at the end, I think for Alaska, we're going to have one product that rises to the occasion.
And I'm completely in agreement with you on that. We just don't have the tankage, and we don't have the rapid supply capability to be able to flip-flop or supply a few things. I would very much like to have some availability of whenever the product is available, at least available for people to begin their own testing. And, you know, I've had several conversations with air carriers, you know, who are willing to try.
Be a test market.
But there's, of course, still going to be a little bit of a hurdle of how do we get to there? How do I have the tank supply? How do I have the constant supply? So these are all things we ask ourselves constantly. And I'm already trying to get the feel of the street. That's part of what I do. And more to come, hopefully. I mean, this finding was not surprising to any of us.
None of us were surprised.
And I didn't think anybody thought that lead was good for the atmosphere. But it's really kind of jump-started everybody's attention again, I think. And in a good way. And I know that whatever the product is, we're going to get there together and we're going to supply it. It's just going to be a little painful here for a little bit while we wait for it to happen, I guess is the right way to say it.
Yeah. Well, great. Well, Ross, I really appreciate you taking the time and having this conversation with us. We're going to keep communicating, you and I.
Absolutely.
And for those of you out there that are watching this, this is not a done deal. This is a long process, and we've already talked about how the EPA's finding, again, was not a surprise. What does it actually mean that it's come out like this? What are the steps looking forward in the road ahead? And this is one component that I think is very important that we talk about and understand a better picture of what does it take from a logistical standpoint for us to have fuel available to put in our wing, whether it's 100 low lead or any of the other potential options that are out there, and that it's not an easy overnight switch.
Correct.
So, Ross, thank you.
Absolutely. And one last thing I'd like to throw out there to members as well is that if you have a small flying club or if you represent a specific area and you want to speak with Crowley about the fuel supply, or you have questions or suggestions or anything like that, please, by all means, reach out. We need to be talking about this a lot, and we want to be available, and we want to make sure that there's no gap in service at any time.
And we'll be able to include your email and have folks be able to get directly in touch with you. So
thank you so much.
Again, great news. Great that Crowley's part of this discussion. And thank you for what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Look forward to what's next.
All right, we'll see you.
Thank you so much.
All right, folks, we are continuing on this deep dive into the 100 low lead fuel and the possible replacements that we've got coming up on the horizon. And we've already talked a little bit about supply chain issues. We've talked about the basic general overall process that we're in the middle of right now. There have been some new developments in the days since the previous segment was recorded to today. This is a fast-paced issue, and I don't think it's going to slow down. And so some new news comes out just about every week, it seems, about the progress of this. But I've got Kurt Hartwig with me now here via Zoom. The moderns of the modern technology, the benefits of being able to do this stuff. I'm traveling right now, not at the home office, not in Anchorage, actually down on Prince of Wales Island, and Kurt's on the other part of the U.S. And we're both dealing with winter, different levels of winter, but it's nice to be able to do this kind of remote. And so Kurt and I have known each other for a while. We see each other a lot of the trade shows. Kurt is with Eagle Fuel Cells, and one of the things that he and I have talked about, even before this issue really started to come into the limelight, is there's a lot more to just changing fuels than whether or not an engine will run on a particular blend of petroleum, right, Kurt?
That's exactly the point I try to make.
Yeah. And so it's been an interesting conversation through the years about this issue. And I think it's important that all of us know and understand some of the other things that may not be getting as much limelight as whether or not an engine's going to detonate or self-destruct, or if it's going to run till TBO on a certain petroleum product. So, Kurt, I'm going to let you go ahead and kind of talk about some of the other systems and components and other things that we need to consider when we're looking at this change from going away from a leaded fuel to what some of these alternatives are.
Yeah, thanks, Adam. I speak at IA refresher courses around the country, and I think the first time that I presented some of this stuff was last year or this past year up in Palmer, and
Right.
I think it was eye-opening to some people. Most of the people that I've presented to at different IA seminars, and that, like you said, it's changing so quickly. I've updated this probably 6-8 times already. But the main issue on why I felt it was important to bring this forward to, especially to mechanics, but this goes to operators as well, is to understand that the big focus has been on the engine. You know, I've got a lot of money invested in the engine. For you guys, it's a little more of a safety thing, you know, not being close to a lot of airports if something does go wrong. But the big investment is the engine. But on the other side, there's a lot of other components that are touching this fuel. And that is really where I come in, and I not throw up a red flag, but say, hey, you know, your engine might turn, and what it does, positive or negative in that regard, you know, other people can speak to that. But my concerns on what I've seen already with 100 low lead since we've had the change, and then also too in the testings, the PAFI testing, and just even some of the input from the people that are producing the fuels already, things that we need to be proactive about. And so instead of going through my whole program, I do have a PowerPoint, or a part of my PowerPoint I can share here with people if you want me to go do that now.
Yeah, let's do that, because like I said, this is a part of this whole switch that it's being mentioned. I know it's being worked behind the scenes, but I haven't seen a lot of talk about it in the press. There hasn't been a lot of conversations when we do our hangar flying, you know, and sit around and tell lies. You know, a lot of people aren't talking about this part of it, and I really appreciate you being willing to come in and kind of give us the scoop on what you think from your side of the house.
Okay. Well, like I said, the majority of this is sort of like the last 10, 15 slides, I think, is really what the heart view I want to talk about. But I do want to preface it by saying the first part of my presentation that I put out to the mechanics and owners, because I've done some owner presentations as well, is talking about history. You know, fuel, I don't claim to be a chemist. I don't petroleum guy, but right. There's enough history out there that if you've lived through some of it or you research it, there's some lessons to be learned. You know, if people don't learn history, you're doomed to repeat it. And one of those things that is very telling to me, once I understood what was all going on here, was when we went from 100 octane to 100 low lead, we actually became an aromatic fuel. And what that means is it's not, there's more chemical in there. If you want to call it, I want to call them paint thinners, but you know, there's solvent type things that are in there now that boost octane. Okay. And components, not just engines, but we're talking about rubber things, seals, hoses, fuel cells, everything that touches that fuel. Aromatics, they were never designed to touch those chemicals original. And so when people say, well, we've never been down this path before, I would argue that we have. When we went from 100 octane to 100 low lead, we actually went from no or very little aromatics up to about 18.5%. When they switched. Now, as they've forced more and more of the lead out, I don't know the exact number, but I'm thinking that we're somewhere near 25%
Oh, wow.
aromatic,
Okay.
and that's where you get, I don't know if some people are familiar with it. Trying to remember how many years ago this was now, a few years back. They
Sure.
came out with VLL.
Okay.
The engine manufacturers all said our engines are approved to run on VLL, which is very low lead,
Very low
which is
lead. Okay. Right.
basically squeezing all the lead that you possibly can out and
Sure.
putting aromatics to replace that and still have
Okay.
100 low lead. That's basically what it is. And once again, I'm slam dancing through this a little bit.
Right.
The
Right.
idea is you're getting more chemical than you ever have. So with the VLL, we have a greater amount of aromatics that are in there. And as we transition to the unleaded fuel, the recipe changes dramatically. But what we're going to end up seeing potentially is what they call aromatic amines.
Okay.
Not all the formulations have aromatic amines, but there are some that are using those, and those are
Sure.
very aggressive on rubber components. So when the dust settles and we end up with potentially one unleaded fuel, depending on what it is, there's going to be greater or lesser reaction, if you will, with the rubber components. Okay. The one of the people that have put forth their fuel and people are using already, they say in their program that you will need over time to upgrade your rubber components, and the reason being is um, the the rubber components are already tired from dealing with 100 low lead and VLL. Okay.
Okay.
So now you're going to be using more aggressive chemicals in there, and the rubber is just, it's wearing out. And I can honestly tell you that within the past year and a half, when it comes to fuel cells,
Right.
it's been dramatic. It's been
Really.
very dramatic what I've seen. And I don't think it's because of people using the unleaded fuels that are available. I think it's coming from just the fact that old fuel cells are just tired after being in 100 low lead for so long.
Okay.
Honestly, depending on how long you've been turning wrenches or been in the aviation business, people ask me the question, how can my Bonanza or my old 180 or 195 from 1950 whatever, 40 whatever,
Sure.
that tank lasted 50 years, and now you can't
That's
get a
right.
tank to last 15 or 20. And the answer is the original 50 years that was in existence, it was real fuel. It wasn't
Right.
full of aromatics and other things like that. So given that background and understanding that there's chemicals in there now in the fuel that are aggressive to the rubber parts, that's where my focus is. I'm letting people know fuel cells, if they haven't been replaced with, not being prejudice in any sense, but when we've been through this PAFI testing, and we'll show you some slides of what actually was taking place with some of the chemicals that they were proposing, we made the changes with our fuel cells
Okay.
to be able to handle the chemicals that they were proposing. So in 2010, we started a whole new type of rubber that we were using to build tanks. I can't speak for my competitors, but it would seem to me that they don't think that they've changed much. So
Okay.
any of our tanks that we've sold since 2010, you should be good moving forward. Unfortunately, not knowing until we got into
Right.
this, prior to that, the longevity of our original nitrile tanks, they're going to come to an end at some point in time, along with the Goodyears and the Uniroyals and everything else that are also made out of those exact same materials. That stuff's going to start going by the wayside a lot quicker, and that's what we're seeing.
Sure.
So if you like, I'll click over onto
Yeah. No, let's go ahead and do that.
And we can go through the items more specifically. So like you said in the introduction, things are moving very rapidly. It seems almost like something every week there's a story or a news item coming out on 100 low lead or 100 octane unleaded fuel. The big thing up until this point was waiting for the EPA to do their final ruling of endangerment, and that occurred on October 18th. And I think I remember in one of your updates that you did about a month ago, you brought it up.
Yep.
So if people are not aware, it's official. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means now the rulemaking process has begun. The FAA is going to go through and start setting up everything that needs to take place in order for a new fuel to actually come into the system. They started the Eagle program, which you've touched on, I'm sure, that talks about the supply chain and all the governmental entities and people handling the fuel. But just so people know, they're not just going to cut off 100 low lead cold turkey. This is a process. Sure. It's going to take time. They say up to 7 years. So if there is a line in the sand, it's going to be 2030. At least that's what I've been told. So
yeah, and I'm hearing the same thing. Also, it's very important that everybody understands that's not a hard deadline that's being imposed on by the EPA. That's a goal. We all know how goals work. Sometimes we meet our goals, sometimes we exceed our goals, sometimes our goal slips a little bit. So this is an estimation of when we hope to have things pretty much up. But I'm not holding my breath. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, my understanding is, let's just say yesterday they had a fuel that they wanted to produce. It would take a minimum of 3 years to get from that point to actual full-scale distribution. Sure. So 7 years, I wouldn't say it's aggressive, but I think it's optimistic, but it's a goal we're shooting for. So
that's right. Yeah.
Let's see if I don't know how to click to advance this. There we go. So the touch points here as 2030 approaches, we're going to still see a lot of 100 low lead with a lot of chemical in it still being distributed up until that time of total conversion. You have a variety of different people still in the mix. You've got Swift, who's very, very close to finishing up with theirs. I don't know. And just this past week, VP Racing just got their go-ahead for field trials on theirs. They made it through the PAFI. Now they're going on to the full-scale engine testing. And I haven't heard much on Phillips 66 Afton Chemical. I'm thinking they're sort of like a little bit behind VP Racing, but I still think they're in the mix. I haven't heard much yet, but I would imagine if they want to be in, they got to stay pretty close to the pack. Otherwise, they're going to be behind. Sure. But essentially what these people are doing in this group is they're trying to work through the ASTM standard process. And we'll talk a little bit more about that the ASTM standard that's been used for 100 low lead or aviation fuels has been needed to change because there's things that are going into the fuel that have other ramifications. And so right now, they're developing essentially a revised or updated or new, if you want to call it that, ASTM standard for the unleaded fuel. And Swift has been a major part of that, but these other ones are all going through that testing at the time. Oops. I figured out how to move forward. Swift, they're, like I said, they're finishing their ASTM testing, and they should very shortly have their STC. GAMI, as we know, I think it was back in May or April of this year, some earlier this spring, they got their STC, and whenever they start producing it in mass quantity, probably going to be in California, because they really, really want the stuff. We'll see what it starts to look like. You know what I mean? They're the lead dog right now, and So let's see what happens. And as
Right.
you know, Eagle is working out all the transition details as we go. The new
Yeah.
fuels will eventually be stored in the 100 low lead tanks and fueling equipment, because 100 low lead will go away. Um, Part of the issue, and I think you and I have talked about this on the current reauthorization bill, there's been a bunch of sticking points about the fact that with the current government guarantees for the funding for the airports, they have to keep 100 low lead on the airport
Right.
um, until they've officially determined that everything and they have a drop-in fuel that everybody can use,
Right.
which has caused some interesting things to occur. But ultimately, the idea is whatever replaces 100 low lead is going to be dropped into the same equipment. Supposedly, the drop-in is going to be no engine modifications. There's a possibility of longer TBOs because
Okay.
less lead, cleaner burning, less deposits.
Right.
Once again, engine people would know better about that, but these are some of the things that they've talked about. The possibility of synthetic motor oils, or at least longer oil changes, there are a good possibility. Less frequent spark plug changes. Some people have recorded both ways,
Sure.
no
Yeah.
difference, and some people have had super clean plugs. I think it's
Right.
because people are probably using both types of fuels that it isn't as clean as they think it is. So,
Okay.
and these fuels have to be able to be mixed with no adverse reactions. My big question, and I had brought this up to you, and eventually I'd like to find out a little bit more about this, but automotive fuel, MoGas,
Right.
somebody fuels up out in the field with automotive fuel, lands at Merrill or Hood and puts 100 low lead in, or this unleaded fuel in, excuse me, is there going to be an interaction? Is there going to be an
Right.
issue?
Right.
I haven't got a definitive answer on that. That's one I think that you guys should really pursue.
Sure.
Um, it's the new fuels, because of the way that they're chemically made, they produce more BTUs per gallon. So even though they're going to weigh a little bit more, they're still going to produce the same amount of energy. At least that's the way
Okay.
it's been described to me. Most single engine aircraft, the weight difference isn't a big deal. But when you start talking larger aircraft with
Right.
100 plus gallons of fuel, that extra quarter pound all of a sudden becomes significant.
Right.
Um, Stability, once again, they want it to be more stable, but when you start putting all those other chemicals in there, how stable is it? You know what I
Sure.
mean?
Yep.
Before, in a sealed container, does it oxidize in 10 years, 15 years, whatever? So there
Right.
is some questions of stability. um, Toxicity, yeah, we'll get rid of the lead, but in my opinion, these fuels are going to be just as toxic as the 100 low lead.
Sure.
It's just a different chemical.
Yeah.
um,
Well, and so that
do
does
know
kind of bring up a question, though. If we're replacing the lead with another toxic substance, how long are we going to be able to use this new fuel? And I know we don't have that answer, but are we swapping one poison pill for another that is going to have to be addressed at some point?
Well,
Is another
see,
question we're asking.
that's why I don't beat that drum too hard, and I don't think other people have. If their big pill right now is lead and we can get rid of it, that's great. But when you look at some of the chemicals that have been proposed, there's a
Right.
toxicity concern, and they're on the EPA's list. And yeah, who knows down the road what that'll look like.
Right.
The last thing we know about the new fuels is that they'll go back to the green. There was one producer in some remote location that was still making 100 octane, and
Okay.
I think they've stopped production. So now the green is now available, and my understanding is whatever they go with on the new UL, it's going to go back to green.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
Just a note. Just real quick, they have tons of chemicals that they can at their disposal. Since the 70s when they went unleaded, they've done dramatic research because there's so much auto fuel and everything else, and they've learned so
Right.
much on that side. A lot of that can be brought in to aviation. However, some of the stuff that they use in the auto world cannot be used in aviation because we deal with altitude and temperature, great,
Right.
way different temperature ranges. So alcohols, oxygenates have a possibility, but alcohol definitely is
It's no
something
good.
that really causes a problem. Even I saw a really interesting a YouTube presentation on vapor lock. It was a engineer guy out in I think Seattle area with an RV, one of the RV models, and he experienced vapor lock going over the mountains, and then he described what it looked like, and that would be interesting to find out too. If people are
Sure.
using automotive fuel, as much as they say there's no alcohol in it, you still could end up with it. And the
Right.
way that the power loss and everything occurs, if you watch that video, that's the biggest thing. It's a little bit long, but if you can cut to the part where he talks about what he was experiencing, I found that quite interesting that you can problem solve when you're running into that situation if you are using automotive fuel.
Okay.
Um, so here's a sticker that shows the 100 VLL. Okay, 2011 is when they approved it. And that, like I said, means more aromatics, but the ones that become more scary for the rubber component people like myself is the aromatic amines that you found that are being proposed for the unleaded ones.
Okay.
And if we were dealing with new hoses and new fuel cells, the longevity issue probably wouldn't be so bad. But because these rubber components have been out there for 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years already
Right.
in 100 low lead, they're just done. You put this stuff
Sure.
in there. I think that's the thing that concerns me the most. I wouldn't say it's going to be dramatic, but it is going to be very noticeable when it happens.
Right.
Information for people who want to try the GAMI. I don't know how that works for you guys. It's probably not available in your part of the world, but
It's not yet. That's
if they want to go to the website's there up on the top. Get their information on stuff. This information here is directly off their website, so it's word for word what they do. Swift has their program. They do the 94 octane right now. They have what they call a forever STC. So as we transition to the 100, their STC for 100 until it becomes whatever it becomes, it's the same thing. It's a forever thing. So more information on that. They have a really, in my opinion, a very good FAQ page, frequently asked
right.
questions. So that would be one place that I would spend some time checking out some information. This, like I said, was last week's news. The VP Racing fuel is going to be going to the ASTM testing.
Right.
They do a 150-hour engine durability test, and they figured it's going to take about a year and a half to get through it. So depending on how well that goes, might be seeing them shortly too.
Sure.
This is the Eagle program. If people are not familiar, most of what you're going to find from the FAA is going to be found at the FAA.gov//unleaded.
Right.
This is what it stands for. And like I said, it's supply chain, research, all the things that are going to take us to get to the other end. And you guys have been or specifically you have been a part of this group on the bottom. I should have had your logo on there too.
Well,
Do they
yeah,
count you as an
we
industry advisor?
well, so we have been participating in the Eagle Initiative. we are not quite a heavy enough hitter as our bigger cousins
Yeah.
with the other alphabet groups. So we didn't get a placement on the top sheet, but the Airmen's Association has been a part of the Eagle process from the beginning.
Yeah. And that's good because, your needs are a little bit different than people down
That's right.
here. And I'm so glad that you're staying on top of that. And so people ask the question, why does it take so long? Well, this is a report that the FAA put out in January, February this past year. And now, granted, some of the things that you're going to see in these pictures that are coming up were from some of the losing fuel. I think there was about 8, formulas, whatever, 8 different entrants into the program, and only 2 popped out the other end, which was Swift and Shell. But these are some very interesting information. Like I said, this is you can go on to the FAA website. There's the PDF location on the FAA website, and these were the things that dealt with what I'm talking about today. These next few pictures. It's material compatibility. Excuse me. One of the things that was brought up towards the new ASTM standard was the potential for some of these chemicals to affect paint. And I was just thinking to myself, well, not only paint, this is a metal plane, but you got fabric planes. What does it do to the dope and the pinking and all that stuff that's on there? If you pour gas, or say your tank leaks, you have a metal tank in an older aircraft, and that metal tank leaks and it goes into the wing, what does it do? Those are some of the things that they are addressing. They saw some of this going on, and so that's part of the new ASTM standard that they're working on.
Yeah.
This is the part where it hits the closest to home for us. These are samples of fuel cell materials. I actually helped the lab at Purdue develop a test that would be as close to real world type of a scenario when they're testing. Because they were just tasked, well, how do we test? We're going to go and get the TSO. And I said, that really doesn't help you any. First of all, you're taking new materials. So all the people who make tanks submitted these samples, but it's brand new. I said, what about the 20, 30, 40-year-old fuel bladders that are out there? He says, well, we don't have time to do that, and that's not what we're focused on, but maybe we'll do secondary testing. But I said, well, then if you're going to do this, then you have to make sure that you're doing a test that simulates real world. Most of the testing that you see here is what they call accelerated testing. They'll put it through at high temperatures, or they'll, slosh at a whatever type thing to try and accelerate the results. And that's a standard way that I guess it's proven over time in testing. When they do salt testing, they don't have 10 years to see what it's going to be like, so they do an accelerated testing. Well, these are the results from the accelerated testing on new tanks. This one, I believe, is a urethane tank. This one is a nitrile tank. And you can see now, once again, this might be one of the worst pictures, and also caused by the worst formula that was entered into the system. But what I'm trying to show you here is not to scare you, is to give you an idea why it didn't go so fast. Because you got to realize these tests were done back in 08, 09. And when they started seeing this stuff, they're saying, whoa, slow down.
That's right.
We got to do something here.
Yep.
And so even with the sealants, they saw softening and other things. I'd like to interject here that, a lot of people that have had Cherokees, which are less common in your part of the world, but Moonies, um, the old Bonanza tip tanks and things like that had the thin amount of old type sealant on the metal tanks.
Right. Yep.
You got 100 low lead that's now like an ultrasonic cleaner slowly eroding away the sealant. Okay.
Right. Yep.
And that's with 100 low lead. And now we're going to put in lots more chemical in there. That old tired stuff is just going to have a problem. And that's just
Right.
where it comes from. Good news, all of our stuff that we did, it's all passed the test starting from 2010.
Okay.
Bad news, all the old stuff just doesn't hold up like it used to. And like I said,
Right.
I've really seen a lot of things in the past year that just, I would have normally repaired it. I just can't repair it anymore. I'm watching seams open up on old tanks that normally I would repair that are,
Sure.
uniroyals and other constructions. We've just been very, very cautious on what we'll repair anymore because the chemicals.
Yeah.
And that's just 100 low lead.
Right.
My biggest concern is rubber components. And if the main rubber that's been used through the system, so everything from a gas cap seal, hoses, fuel cells, drain valves, selector valve O-rings and injector O-rings, all of that originally was nitrile rubber.
Okay.
What I should do is put down the MS number from that. I think it's 29513, I think is the number off the top of my head. But everybody and their brother, that's the rubber that they've always used.
That's
the reality is it doesn't hold up anymore. So this is just a short list of things that are rubber in the fuel system that are just not going to hold up anymore. I mean,
right.
If you go through, and this is what I talked about earlier in my program, if you go back into the 70s and look at the ADs and service bulletins from Cessna, Piper, and other people, you're going to find that most of them are fuel system related, and the 100 low lead affected all these components.
Right.
I personally believe now, and once again, I can't substantiate it, but what I've seen and what I know now, I'm willing to bet you that the famous wrinkle AD that everybody with fuel bladders in a high-wing Cessna
right.
had to deal with, I believe it was caused by 100 low lead.
Really?
Because nothing changed in the design of those tanks. U.S. Rubber built them first, Uniroyal built them next, Goodyear built them for many years, and then all of a sudden in the 70s, we have wrinkles. What's happening is that chemicals caused the material to swell, didn't have a place to go, created the wrinkles. At the same time, the gas cap seals weren't holding up, so they let water in. So you got water in, wrinkles occurred, trapped the water.
Sure.
Voila. That's my opinion on that. So we're sort of coming
into but that's a high likelihood that would happen again when we change fuels.
That's what I was just about to say, that there's a possibility we might run into that again. Once again, don't know, because we've done accelerated testing, but there's a possibility that'll happen. And I'm not trying to scare people. I'm just saying, if we start to replace things systematically over the next several years, we're going to be a lot better off. Once again, sealants and everything, I'm not a sealant guy, but here's some aircraft that have had sealants, and we've known them to have problems because of 100 low lead aromatics.
Sure.
So should we panic? The simple answer is no, but the longer answer means we need to be doing something. And what I think we should be doing is replacing the rubber components that are in there systematically. They're already recommending that people inspect these things. There's no list. There's no checklist. There's nothing out there
Right.
that says, check this, check that. People that were involved in the PAFI program, like our company, I talked to guys that do fuel pumps. I've talked to guys that they've all upgraded to these materials already. Fuel injectors, you'll see the blue fluorosilicone or the Viton on the injectors now. Why?
Yep.
Because nitrile doesn't hold up. So a lot of these things have been going on over time, but not everything. So think about the typical 180, 185 with the hard lines coming down from the wing down the pillar post, but little segments of hose all over the place.
Yep.
Those hoses probably have never been changed.
Right.
What is that going to create? I don't know if it's going to cause leaks or what's going to cause, but we need to start changing some of that stuff. And the two words that people need to think about, the two rubbers that are most common now, is the blue fluorosilicone. And so it's a sort of a dark gray, but Viton. Both of these are trade names, but they're like Kleenex. Everybody knows what a Kleenex is. Well, Viton is sort of the same thing. It's it's a fluoroelastomer, but we'll call it its trade name. This is sort of what the O-rings look like. Like I said, there's, if you're into the abbreviations, that's what fluorosilicone looks like. FKM is the Viton one. You can see that the blue fluorosilicone is softer. It's more like silicone. It can handle the temperatures down low. We used to supply fluorosilicone in our drain valves, and I said, well, it's good for you guys up in Alaska. And the guy said, if it's that cold outside, if there's water down there, it's frozen. And
it's frozen. That's right.
Never mind. It's not doing anything.
Yep.
So, but Viton or fluorosilicone, both of those are good. I recommend the Viton in any type of scenario where you've got a lot of mechanical wear and tear. So gas caps, selector valves, drain valves, that type thing. The Viton is going to be much better for you. In a static thing like an injector, the fluorosilicone works just fine. And then the last point really that I wanted to make is, since nobody has a list, we should probably start to develop one. And you guys can fit in here somewhere, I'm sure, because the idea is you got to get someone who's going to help develop the plan and tell people where the resources are and get the understanding, sort of like what I'm doing here right now. They need to be able to present that on their website or through their tech people and say, okay, like I said, general managers go to the coaches and say, American Bonanza Society or Cessna 185 operators or, whoever, CPA, you guys are going to have to go through all the IPCs because Textron's not going to do it for you. Piper's not going to do it for you. Okay. They have enough trouble keeping everything flying that they're producing today, let alone a 1940 whatever. So you're going to have to go through, start at the gas cap, look at all the rubber components. You're going to have to say, this is the part number. Go online, find the alternate part number, because PMA part numbers generally are not the same. They can't be the same, actually. Find out who manufactures them, if they're still in business, who the distributors are, and what those cost estimates are. And once you've made the grocery list for each individual model, then the owner needs to get that list and then go to their A&P and say, hey, we got to come up with a plan over the next 7 years that all my annuals start to do this. And you can sit back and say, when unleaded comes, I'll take care of it. I like to use the example of that's what we did with ELTs, and that's what we did with ADSB, and guess what? Everybody waited till it was final rule, and then what happened? There
There was
wasn't
a
enough
huge
people to
backlog
produce it.
and nobody got it done.
And you have nobody who, I mean, everybody's backed up trying to install the stuff. It's going to be the same way with this. If we do this progressively, the speed bump on the other end is going to be a lot smaller. Like I said, some of this stuff has already been done. You know, there's people like us,
Right.
there's people, you know, that have done overhauls on engine components and fuel components and stuff that have already upgraded a lot of this stuff. But I would say a lot of what's up in your world, there's a lot that's probably needs to get done.
Sure.
Probably a little more so.
Yeah.
But don't know. And I don't know if I have anything else on here. No, that's it.
Sure.
Just stale fuel. You know, what that means is fuel oxidizes over time. We know that a sealed container of 100 low lead, there's barrels up there from World War II. As long as it's sealed, it's still good, you know.
Right.
As soon as you get into a vented system, these chemicals percolate off and the fuel starts to oxidize. So,
Sure.
you know, fuel that sits in an airplane for 2-3 years, is it really 100 octane anymore? The answer is probably not.
Probably not. That's right.
And if you got a 90 octane or 80 octane rated engine, no big deal. As long as it's not gummed up anything, it'll still
Right.
turn the prop. But you know, we've got a ton of people pulling out planes out of hangars down here to get in on the market, selling stuff that I tell the mechanics just get rid of it because it's not good stuff. So,
Right. Yeah.
but I'm going to stop sharing here.
Okay. No,
and go
well,
back
so
to
Kurt,
reality.
yeah,
But
that's all great information. And again, for everybody else's benefit, you and I have talked about these things for a couple, 3 years now, and I think it's important that people know and understand some of the peripheral issues that we think we're going to find when we start making this shift. And your comments about now's the time, I think is very important for people to get. These seals and these O-rings, they are approved to be able to use.
Yep.
And if you just start going through the entire fuel system, these are the best available seals today to be able to handle the chemicals that we are confident are going to be in the fuels of tomorrow. And those of us here in Alaska, fuel systems are important, and we can't risk not having things done right when it comes to fuel supply to our engines. So, so Kurt, I know you guys have a website where you talk about your products and other things. We've really appreciated your company and you specifically coming up to Alaska every May and being at the gathering.
Palmer's a great place to go. I love Palmer.
Yeah. And so look forward to seeing you again in May. Encourage folks to stop by your booth and talk to you if they've got questions or concerns. And I know that May seems like forever since we're here in the middle of winter right now.
Yeah.
But it'll be coming sooner than we think. And if folks have any more comments or questions about this issue, not just dealing with fuel system components, but supply chain or just the process in general, folks know how to reach out and get in touch with me through our website. Watch my monthly updates where I talk about all the issues that are going on. But this specific issue deserved a deep dive, an opportunity for us to get all the way down into the weeds and figure out how is this really going to impact Alaska. So Kurt, I really appreciate your time. Appreciate that data and that information. And we look forward to seeing you in May.
Sounds good. You guys have a good day.
All right. We'll see you.